Hello, everybody. Murphy Daily here on Written by Murphy. This is another one of the series of the Immigrant's Guide to American Literature. Today, I want to talk to you about the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. This is a good one. It was published right after America became America. So it could be one of the first truly American. It is in my series, it's the first truly American book after America became a country. This is a nonfiction book. It's an autobiography. It was written by Benjamin Franklin, who is an extraordinary person. He's known for many things. One, for helping found the country of America, big deal. He's known for his politics. He's known for writing. He started Poor Richard's Almanac, which was a newspaper in America before America became its own country. And he started many businesses. He was a scientist. He's known for his experiments with electricity. He's just an extraordinary person. And he took the time to write an extraordinary autobiography. I'm going to call it, you guys. This book, it impressed me so much. I'd read it as a young person, and reading it again now, I was floored with how good it was. It was so good that it actually took me several weeks, more than a month, to do this video about the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. I'm going to call this sui generis. Sui generis means self-generating. This is not a derivative piece of literature. This is nonfiction. So that's often outside of the canon of literature, because literature tends to be, novels and poetry and drama. But this is nonfiction. It's an autobiography. And as an autobiography, I would say it is the first autobiography of its kind that every autobiography afterwards in America really followed this example. He is talking about his life in some of the most approachable stories and then I did this kind of storytelling way that it's so endearing. And his marvelous genius is not seen as something, oh, only he could have done that. I look at what his life is. I, a woman, 250 years later? And I think, I could do that. Oh my gosh, he's just like me. And that is extraordinary. That's extraordinary. His voice rings through all these hundreds of years later. He starts the autobiography saying he is writing to his grandson, I believe. And so it sounds like a grandfather telling you about some of his favorite stories in his life. I didn't have that sort of grandfather, but I can imagine it. Many people are lucky enough to have had that sort of storytelling grandfather. And he is a great man of history, but his story doesn't come across that way. It comes across as human and approachable and funny and full of mistakes, which is not what came before in literature. So that's why I say sui generis, which is, I can't remember if it's Greek or Latin, but it has to do with sui, which is another root of a word that is part of suicide, selfness. So it is of its own self created. It is self-created, sui generis. And Benjamin Franklin I've described a bit. Not only as a piece of literature is it extraordinary, I knew this was going to happen when I did this. I'm scattering around already because I'm so impressed with it. Let's talk about Benjamin Franklin just for a little bit. He himself admits that he was the youngest son of the youngest son for 5 generations. 5 generations of not inheriting hardly anything. That's what that means. And so he was not someone who had a substantial leg up. In his story, he does describe how his father advised him, and he felt his father was a wise man. He also was able to work with some of his older brothers, mostly one, and learn about printing. That's not a significant inheritance of legacy. It's that this is an ordinary sort of thing. And he managed to find his way in life. And he describes exactly how he does it. So he himself was born, Benjamin Franklin was born in 1706, died in 1790. So this is really the very beginning of America as a country. He is the American Renaissance man, having done so many things, been an expert in so many things, and influenced the world. He, in his autobiography, he describes things that have become, whether we understand it as coming from this source, but so many things that are American ideals. Picking yourself up by your own bootstraps, finding your way to finding your fortune in his particular way. And he describes looking around him, seeing a way that things could be better, working with others to try and make it better. He describes going forward, working with some friends that didn't do well by him, working with friends that did do well by him, but keeping on and keeping going so that he eventually arrived at a destination, but he never stopped at his destination. He always was looking for more in a very American way of kind of poking at it, going, what's that? What will happen if I do this? Which I find so endearing that I've been raving about this book to all my friends and saying, go read it right now. So he himself is an extraordinary person. The place in history, let's talk about this. I keep saying it. Right at this moment, America is starting. And unlike the 1600s, in which I had to dip into sermons in order to find good examples of American literature, now we are having an era where fiction is back. This is the same period, the early half of the 1700s. Jonathan Swift was around, Daniel Defoe was around, as we know about Robinson Crusoe, Moll Flanders, unless I'm getting that mixed up. So these are back in vogue again. We are back to imagination. Jonathan Swift was certainly an extraordinary imagination as he was writing in his satire. So we've left seriousness behind in English literature, and Benjamin Franklin is part of that. In addition to literature, as a human being, he was also curious about scientific exploration and setting up systems inside of a society. Early on, I talked about the City on the Hill sermon, where the Puritan John Winthrop was talking about, we will be a city on a hill and everyone will be watching us. That was very early on in trying to create a society, well, a government and a society. Well, Benjamin Franklin, as an American, 100 years later, was like, yeah, how do we do this? And he was much more interested in practical things like making a library. I'm a fan of that, making a library. So he actually talked about not what we understand as libraries now, which is you go to the library and you have a card and there's just this huge quantity of books that you can get at. Well, they didn't have anything like that. What they did is he and his friends pooled together their money and said, let's all just pool our money and buy books and share the books. Really basic. Just he liked books. He wanted to increase his number of books, so he started, getting people together. And he came up with practical cooperative ideas just like that, which is going even further down the path that John Winthrop set up. So this is a very, what can we do? What can we all do together? Not waiting for someone else to come up with the idea, but having us. We just get together, me and my friends are going to go do this, said Benjamin Franklin, which is a very compelling and attractive American characteristic. So that's part of the place in history. We're talking about making a society, and a society that hasn't been there that long. There's a lot of room for creation. And that's what this book talks about. Explains how you do it. So in that same spirit of how can we come all together and do this, they also created a country. He didn't get actually too deep in that still. So this is his place in history, and the book's place in history. When people were getting off of the age of enlightenment and into more talking like people instead of talking like logical rhetoricians. So that's where he's living, and he creates a book. Now let's talk about the prose. He creates a book that is unlike any other book I've seen, and is the fount for all of the books that came later. Autobiographies of people who want to be president, autobiographies of people who were the CEOs of large companies, autobiographies of great men and women. He started that genre. And you read it now and find it so familiar. I would say his is better than most because he doesn't ramble on. It's actually rather short. He's so good. I'm never going to stop reading this book. So he came up with this book, and yes, it does have some scent of antiquity. The phrases he uses, the turns of dependent clauses, just, some, but nothing, to me at least, nothing that you couldn't figure out quickly. It's not so far distant from my current use of speech to find it difficult to follow. So for someone who hasn't read this book, that wants to know more about why America is what it is, this one is 1,000% recommended. It influenced Americans. It's still in print because it's still an awesome book. It's kind of the sort of book that a young person would go, oh yeah, I should do that. And also, oh yeah, I should not be so hard on myself. Because he does a lot of silly things and keeps going and just gets up. In any case, this is an outstanding piece of American literature. And I'm so glad I read it. Even if it were utterly fiction, it would be worth reading. But the fact that it is the story of a man who was an extraordinary human being whom I would have found such delight in sitting down and having conversation with him. This one really should be read to understand how America is put together from the start.